They didn't have protein shakes, fancy supplements, or grocery aisles stacked with convenience. Yet, when the world fell apart during the Great Depression, ordinary people discovered a hidden kind of alchemy, turning kitchen scraps and leftovers into high-protein lifelines. What they created wasn't just food. It was survival science forged from desperation and grit. And when World War II rolled in, those same humble recipes quietly powered soldiers, families, and victory itself. Let's break open one of the greatest forgotten food hacks in history, the protein-rich survival food that came from nothing but scraps, willpower, and a deep understanding of how to make every crumb count. During the Great Depression, protein wasn't just expensive, it was a luxury. Meat disappeared from many dinner tables, eggs were rationed, and beans, you'd better guard them like gold. But hunger has a strange way of unlocking creativity. Across America and Europe, resourceful families began experimenting, grinding, fermenting, and repurposing everything from bread crusts and potato peelings to bones and spoiled grains. Nothing went to waste, not even bones. They were boiled until the marrow released its rich nutrients, creating broths so dense they turned cloudy. Leftover beans and lentils were mashed into paste, mixed with breadcrumbs and wild greens, then sun-dried into makeshift meat cakes. These weren't gourmet dishes. They were nutritional masterpieces born in chaos. What people discovered was, honestly, kind of shocking. Scraps, when fermented, roasted, or dried properly, could actually rival meat in protein and minerals. The secret, it turned out, lay in unlocking the natural amino acids already present in everyday food waste. Let's talk about the unsung hero of Depression-era kitchens, the so-called protein cake. Now, it wasn't really a cake at all. Instead, it was a mix of leftover grains, vegetable pulp, dried beans, and sometimes just a sprinkle of animal fat or drippings. When blended, baked, or pan-fried, these dense patties became the working family's version of a survival steak. Fermentation was key. Letting mixtures of bread, beans, or grains sit and bubble for a day not only preserved them, but also boosted their protein availability. The natural bacteria broke down fibers, freeing up nutrients that the body could absorb faster. It was, in a way, early biohacking without the lab coats. By the time World War II began, these homemade protein hacks had, evolved into a real strategic advantage. Allied field rations started to include these compressed protein biscuits made from pretty similar recipes. Simple, calorie-dense, shelf-stable, and honestly, just powerful. A single piece could keep a soldier going for hours. When the Great Depression ended, war began. And all that kitchen wisdom was suddenly drafted into service. Food scientists, farmers, and homemakers started merging their ideas, all driven by one goal: keep everyone fed with as little as possible. One of the key lessons learned was, really, the power of plant proteins and fermentation. In military labs, scientists studied how soybeans, peanuts, and even yeast could be used to make protein-rich pastes and powders. That's where yeast protein entered the survival scene. Nutritional yeast became this kind of silent weapon of endurance, packed with B vitamins and protein, and created from the same fermentation tricks Depression families had used in their homes. Even the now famous victory bread of World War II, a dense, slightly sour loaf that stretched limited wheat supplies, borrowed heavily from Depression recipes. Mixed with barley, oats, and sometimes leftover potato pulp, it provided complete protein and long-lasting energy for civilians and soldiers alike. The result? Food that didn't just fill bellies, it built endurance, resilience, and hope. At its core, the Great Depression protein hack wasn't just about recipes. It was about mindset. When everything collapses, you either adapt or you fade. People learned how to see value where others saw garbage. Scraps of vegetables became broths. Stale bread turned into high-protein crouton flour. Even the tough, stringy fibers of weeds and wild greens were softened, fermented, and blended into soups thick enough to rebuild strength. The real secret was in layering nutrition. A single bowl might combine protein from beans, fats from drippings, carbs from bread, and minerals from wild herbs. It was a complete meal disguised as leftovers. That idea, transforming waste into nourishment, wasn't just survival. It was rebellion against scarcity. Fast forward to now, when modern survivalists talk about prepping, and you'll realize these Depression-era methods still beat most modern gear. The techniques were simple, powerful, and timeless. Fermenting old bread into a nutrient-rich base, mixing it with legumes or garden scraps, and then drying it into protein biscuits. It's still possible, and still works. Not only does it extend shelf life, but it actually increases digestibility and flavor. The probiotics from fermentation protect the gut, while the concentrated mix of starches and proteins creates a slow-release energy source, exactly what you'd want in a real emergency. Even bone broth, once dismissed as old-fashioned, has made a comeback for its collagen, calcium, and amino acids, all core elements of the Depression survival strategy. Those scrap soups weren't poor man's meals. They were nutrient gold. The people who lived through that era weren't victims of hard times. They were, masters of biochemical improvisation. Every era of crisis teaches something new, but the Great Depression taught one lesson that keeps echoing. True survival doesn't start with what you have. It starts with what you know. Families who could transform kitchen scraps into nutrient-rich meals outlasted the worst years. Soldiers who ate rations built from the same logic, fermented, dried, concentrated protein, fought longer, harder, and smarter. That's the real power behind the Great Depression protein hack. It wasn't luck. It was ingenuity. Oh, the next time you see leftovers piling up or food going stale, just take a moment to think back to the people who fed entire nations on less than a handful of ingredients. Their wisdom, is still relevant today. It's not just for preppers or homesteaders, but really for anyone who values resilience in a world that forgets fast. What began in desperation became, a roadmap for endurance. The Great Depression protein hack proved that knowledge can outlast famine, war, and even fear. It turned scraps into survival superfood, and it built the foundation for modern nutrition science. Those old kitchens were, laboratories of survival. Every pot of broth, every loaf of poor man's bread, every jar of bubbling fermentation was an act of defiance against hunger. They were proof that survival isn't about abundance. It's about resourcefulness. And maybe, just maybe, it's time to bring some of that wisdom back. If you found this deep dive valuable, make sure to subscribe to Wisdom from the Frontlines, where history's forgotten lessons meet real-world survival knowledge. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who values true preparedness, and remember, sometimes the smartest food on earth starts from the scraps we throw away.